what we think its effect should be on U.S. foreign policy. This is Mike Kulma from the Asia Society, and a future Hunter graduate in a couple of weeks, Matthew Hallex. I'm Matt Alhonte from, I'm the Policy Director of the Roosevelt Institute and Director of the Foreign Policy Research Branch.
So I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I'd like to thank the nice students from the Roosevelt Institution for helping put this together. And I'm also going to thank the Institute for International Education, for whom paid for me to go to China, and this is part of a project for them. This is Mike Kulma. He's the Director of Policy Programs at the Asia Society. He's been at the Asia Society for 8 years, and is in fact an alumni of CUNY, where he got his PhD, and one of my erstwhile employers. So thank you for being here. We're going to talk today about the rise of China, which is a topic of great concern to people throughout the foreign policy community, the business community, and American politicians generally. The rise of China is incredibly impressive from the period of the century of humiliation following its first contact with European imperialists in the late 19th century, the early 20th century, through all of the trials and tribulations of the Chinese Civil War and the, let's say, slightly poorly planned policies that Chairman Mao took from time to time, to a major economic, political, and military power, both in the Asian region and throughout the world. Dealing with the rise of China is going to be the great foreign policy question for the United States in the 21st century. And we're very lucky today to have Mike Kulma here to discuss the rise of China and some of the implications for the United States. So here's the start. Since the death of Chairman Mao, China has gone from being a very poor country, lagging behind its neighbors in terms of economic development and growth, to one of the motors that drives the global economy. What are the sources of this economic growth?
I think you have to take a look. Can people hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, just tell me to speak up, or I'll try and get closer to the microphone if need be. But I think to take a look at some of the more specific things driving China's economic growth, you have to go a little bit back in history to the time just after Mao and the opening and economic reforms. China began its opening economic reforms in the late 70s. It started in the rural areas. When it was successful in the rural areas, it went to the urban areas and began to open. We can talk more of the details about the kinds of different policies that they put into place if people want to question and answer session. This has been coupled with a foreign policy which emphasizes the creation of a favorable international environment where China can focus on independent sovereignty and territorial integrity. At the same time, over the course of the last 25 to 30 years, China has also opened up to the rest of the world, gotten together in cooperative agreements on any number of different fronts. They've normalized relations with most countries around the world, something that hadn't happened prior to the opening in the late 1970s. It has improved its relations with its neighbors, most specifically with Russia, Vietnam, and others with which it had problems with in the 70s, in the 60s and the 70s. It's cultivated a more cooperative relationship with international institutions as well. It joined APEC in 1991. It joined the WTO in 2001. And it is currently involved in FDA talks with over 28 countries around the world. So I mean, you've really seen major efforts on both the domestic economy and the foreign policy fronts for the Chinese as part and parcel of an effort to grow its economy. The drivers of economic growth right now, I think, can be put into three large categories. There's investment growth, there's export-led growth, and there's consumer-driven growth. Each of which, I mean, give or take, I think, and depending on the numbers and whose numbers you happen to be looking at any given time, make up approximately a third of the growth that China's experienced over the course of the last few years. And when we take a look at China's growth, you guys have all heard the numbers if you're following China at all. We've seen approximately 8 to 10% growth over the course of the last 30 years, which is, tremendous by any standards. But the three, I think, so you have to put a little bit of a historical context to talk about the policies that were put into place, both on the domestic and the international fronts, and then more specifically investments, exports, and consumer.
Now, when most people in the West us, or at least in the United States, think of China, I think we focus on the export-led growth angle. We see China as a source of cheap consumer goods that they stock the Walmarts with knockoffs of Western products, take jobs from the American heartland and such like. To what extent is that perception of the Chinese economy true? And is China a manufacturing-based economy, and will it remain so in the future? Or should we expect China to be competing with the United States in terms of services and innovating instead of just manufacturing?
Well, first, in the first part of your question, you're talking or suggest that the goods that they're producing are knockoffs that are being, and that's what's being stocked in Walmart. I would change that a little bit, certainly, to say there are certainly plenty of knockoffs being produced, but I don't think they're making it into our stores. The things that they're producing for our stores are the things that they're producing for Walmart and other stores and or companies around the world. There are plenty of other knockoffs that you can buy within China itself that are knockoffs of actual products. And so just a small distinction, I think, to be made there. They are certainly, as anyone can tell, we can go from anecdotal evidence where you can just take a look at anything that you happen to be wearing tonight. You'll probably find that it was made in China. To the fact that China is certainly one of the largest manufacturing countries in the world. It is slowly beginning to move away from that sector. A result of a number of different things, from higher labor costs, in which companies that went from Taiwan or Korea, or went from maybe Japan to Taiwan to Korea, and then went to China, people are now starting to say, well, labor costs are going up, inflation is starting to get a little bit further in China. They're beginning to think about countries like Vietnam and Cambodia. Having said that, I think it's going to be quite some time before China actually gets into the realm of challenging the United States in any way, shape, or form on the services or kind of high-end technology types of products. Certainly you're seeing some of that happening. Most of that, I would argue, is happening in two different areas of China. In companies that are moving from Hong Kong, or Hong Kong companies that are in the Shenzhen and Guangzhou area, kind of the southeastern part of China, and then across the straits from Taiwan. There are about 1 million or so people, estimates suggest, 1 million Taiwanese living in China. Most of those are on the coast, kind of the Fujian, Shanghai area. And there are companies, some of the semiconductor companies and things like that from Taiwan have moved operations, or at least parts of their operations, to China in that respect. So you're starting to see an increasing capacity for that. China's going to be faced by a number of different hurdles, I think, over the course of time in trying to do that. Whereas you do see a pretty large increase over the course of the last 10, 15 years in college degrees granted in China, in masters and PhDs in the engineering and kind of higher education fields. There are people who are now starting to rebut some of those statistics that are kind of threatening to the United States, that China produces 100 times more engineers than the United States or other countries in the West, to suggest that by the standards that we judge PhDs in the engineering fields, maybe 10% of those PhDs coming out of China actually perform at the level that engineering PhDs perform in the United States. So I think there's a long way to go in that effort for China to move from a manufacturing economy, and that's certainly a big challenge that they're going to face. One of the reasons I think you see so many Chinese students coming to the United States, or to Australia, or to Japan, or to the other countries of the West, is because still our system of education at the university level and above is still better, generally speaking. If you look at some of the statistics that, or studies that have come out about some of these ranking institutions, and take a look at the top universities, let's say. This may not be the best judge of Chinese education levels, but if you look at some of those, you find that there are very few Chinese universities that rank in the top 100 universities in the world. And the two that always come up, of course, are Beijing University and Tsinghua University. So China really needs to put a greater degree of effort, more resources into higher education, I think, in order to continue to progress along that lines and get to a level where it might even begin to kind of dip into the U.S. advantage in services.